Asia's celebrated middle class, long the engine of growth, is changing.
They're not just consumers. They are trendsetters and also a key indicator of future growth potential.
With over 400 million, China's middle class is larger than the population of the United States. But these days, the average Chinese consumer is spending less.
之前可能看到什么喜欢的东西，我们就会去想买，但是现在我们要考虑这个东西是不是必须的。
What happens when the world's largest middle-class bloc scrimps and saves?
China is actually still a developing economy with a growth rate of around 5%. Having a 1% inflation just simply do not make too much sense.
And is the Chinese middle-class dream still alive?
像我们这种生活并不容易的，咱们还要为孩子上学做什么事都要精打细算。
In Guangzhou, China, the Li family had just returned from a vacation. Early February marked China's Spring Festival, a time when the Chinese travel back to their hometowns to visit family or sightsee.
我今年春節去旅行嘅話，去咗江西嘅定南古鎮，咁去咗3日嘅，同我先生同埋囡囡一齊去啦。咁我哋廣州由呢度出發去江西嘅話，其實都係2個零鐘嘅咋，大概去用咗3-4千蚊啦。
The holiday travel rush lasted for 40 days this year, racking up a record 9 billion trips taken across the country. It's known as the largest annual human migration. Besides the festivities and pageantry, there is one reason China watchers pay close attention to the Spring Festival.
As economists, we always look to barometers or early signals, right, of where a particular phenomenon is headed. So where would Chinese consumer spending or consumption spending be like for 2025 for this year? There are a few indicators, right, early indicators. One would be spending over or just before the Chinese New Year period and during the Chinese New Year period. We look to those as indicators of consumption spending, obviously, but also of consumer confidence.
This year, through the first 8 days of the Spring Festival, domestic travel spending hit an all-time high of 677 billion yuan, or 93 billion US dollars. But a deeper look tells a different story. Per-person spending only climbed 1% from 2024 and remains below pre-pandemic levels.
今次嘅春節旅行花費，其實我哋係放咗喺即係感受一下過年氣氛咯。聽講我哋嗰陣時係聽講話定南古鎮嘅話咧，喺春節會有好多表演節目啦，咁所以我哋係去一個感受一個中國嘅傳統嘅非遺嘅一個氣氛，我哋係去感受氣氛嘅。
Li's daughter was born during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, they've become more cost-conscious with their holiday budget.
以前嘅話咧就會即係周圍去啦，咁當然而家就會係以前出國遊，而家咧就周邊遊。其實而家冇咁瀟灑嘅原因咧，我覺得都係因為有咗小朋友啦，咁同埋係疫情之後嘅一個經濟比較下滑咗少少嘅原因。咁小朋友嘅花費會比較大啲啦，咁我哋已經嘅重心咧就會由即係自己嘅一個享樂啦，換咗係俾小朋友嘅教育。
With an annual household income of more than 300,000 yuan, the Li family fall into China's middle income group. The National Bureau of Statistics defines the group as 3-person households earning between 100,000 to 500,000 yuan a year.
I think there's no one definition for middle class. And I think a middle class should be someone who are decently educated, right? Get some tertiary education. And also related to people's social status. So that's why the professionals and the managers tend to be the middle class. And also, I think a middle class should be someone who have access to a stable home, retirement saving, health care maybe, and even the affordability, okay, to enjoy some vacation, entertainment.
A third of the country's population, some 400 to 500 million, belong in this category, making China the country with the world's largest middle class.
The rise of China's middle class is one of the most remarkable stories in the past few decades. It all began with the economic reforms starting in the 1970s and the 1980s, embracing market principles and opening up to the world, unleashed incredible growth. Joining the WTO in 2001 was another milestone, turning China into the world's factories. So this rapid expansion created vast opportunities, lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, and fueled the rise of a substantial middle class.
With more disposable income, the Chinese middle class started spending big.
Material things became a big focus, like getting a bigger apartment or buying a new machine. So these things were symbols of progress. So it's a tangible way to show that life was getting better. Fast forward to today, the picture is very different. The middle class today has far more choices and opportunities. So it's not just about material goods. They're also investing in experiences like travel, concerts, dining out. So we see a real diversification of lifestyles.
In 2022, middle class spending was estimated at $2.3 trillion, about a quarter of China's GDP.
Middle classes tend to be the biggest source of consumption and consumption growth in any economy. In the middle class in China alone, it's about more than 400 million people. That is bigger than the entire population of the United States. The middle class consumption in China alone is larger than the entire size of the Japanese economy.
So their choice is shape entire industries. So are they buying domestic brands or imported goods? Are they investing in education, healthcare, or entertainment? So these decisions affect business opportunities and job creation in specific sectors. They're not just consumers, they are trend setters and also a key indicator of future growth potential. So that's why governments around the world, not just China, pay close attention to the habits of the middle class.
But China's middle class is changing. While the size of the Chinese middle class is increasing steadily, how much they spend is growing at a slower pace.
Before COVID, there was much more of a tendency to buy expensive goods, right? Branded goods, as well as Western brands. Instead of Western brands, they now favor homegrown brands. Partly for patriotic reasons, but also partly reflecting the slowdown in the Chinese economy. And so, more careful spending habits by the urban middle classes.
Last year, the luxury goods market saw a 20% drop in sales, according to consultancy firm Bain & Co. It's the sharpest drop in 14 years, and spending in this sector is expected to be muted in the first half of 2025.
對於節衣縮食嘅話，其實我覺得喺衣食住行嚟講，我哋都樣樣嘢，方方面面都會做到嘅。例如，即係如果係去食啦、買菜嘅話啦，以前就會去對面嘅supermarket 度買菜啦。咁而家嘅話，我會選擇去街市買菜比較多啲嘅。着衫啊方面嘅話咧，就會買少咗好多啦。護膚品啊、化妝品啊，同埋一啲衫褲鞋襪啊，咁我同我老公都買少好多。
Rather than spending, the Chinese are choosing to save. Post-COVID, savings deposits reached 17.8 trillion yuan in 2022. That's according to data from the central bank. while 2023 saw a slight dip to 16.7 trillion yuan, the decrease in excess savings didn't translate to an increase in consumer spending.
One of the reasons China's middle class save a lot is because of relatively weak or inadequate social protection, right, in terms of pensions, old age retirement, healthcare, and even their children's education. Chinese households save about a third of their disposable income, which is very high. China is the global champion in savings.
因為有小朋友嘅話咧，其實錢係會不斷用喺佢身上嘅，咁所以其實我哋嘅目標當然想儲多啲錢啦，咁但係咧就比較地難儲錢，因為經濟比較唔係咁景氣嘅情況之下，其實好少有多餘嘅錢出嚟㗎啦。
It has been 5 years since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Why is the Chinese middle class still reluctant to spend?
"之前可能看到什么喜欢的东西，我们就会去想买，但是现在我们要考虑这个东西是不是必须的，能在家里尽量节省一点。"
Wang Fan celebrated his 18th birthday in 2022. 5 years before he reached adulthood, his father had purchased an investment property. He was expecting to reap significant returns for his son's future. But it didn't quite pan out.
在17年，我们是200万买入这处房的，然后23年卖掉的时候，它值165万。因为当时是在雄安新区嘛，雄安新区被列入发展重心区域，所以那里的房产涨得非常的快，大家都在抢购，所以我们家也打算在那个时候入一个房产。在23年之前，我们家有4处房产，然后在23年的时候，我们卖掉了1处房产，所以现在是有3处。
An estimated 60 to 70% of Chinese household wealth is invested in real estate, and it's common for a middle-class family to own more than one property. Prices, however, have been sliding since the 2021 property downturn, wiping out investment savings and disposable income. Real estate prices fell after the government tightened financing rules for individuals and developers. Prime areas in the biggest cities saw price declines of 15% or more.
我的父亲也是一直在关注我们购买这个房产的价格，然后我的父亲发现这个房产价格越来越低了，所以在23年的时候将这处房产卖掉了。现在的经济环境压力比较大嘛，如果将这处房存在我手里，说实话，其实我们也不会去那边住，再放在我们手里，其实作用也不是很大。如果任由它亏损的话，我觉得还是及时止损比较好。
So imagine your wealth, 60% of your wealth is falling in value. That causes what we call a negative wealth effect, which means that as your wealth levels fall, you're also less likely to spend, right? It reduces your marginal propensity to consume.
每个月的支出大概在1万左右，每个月支出每年都在减少吧，比最好的那段时间大概少了1倍左右。之前大概是2-3万元的消费。
China's recent economic slowdown started with the COVID-19 pandemic. Recovery from its 3-year containment policy has been slow. Pre-pandemic, China's GDP was expanding at 6.1% in 2019. Last year, it logged a 5% growth for the second year in a row. For 2025, the government is also expecting to stick to this target.
China, among the major economies, is unusual in that it hasn't really had a post-COVID rebound. All the other major economies in the world had very strong post-COVID rebounds, contributing to the return of inflation. Right? Prices across the world rose, partly because there was so much pent-up demand that was unleashed that was released when COVID restrictions were ended. In China, that hasn't really happened.
Last year, the household income growth rate was about 4.6% year over year. That's not too bad compared with the global average, but it's much slower than the pre-COVID level. If I remember correctly, in 2019, the income growth was close to 8%, 7.9 precisely. So you can see income growth is slowed from 8% to about 4.6. That's a lot. That's almost an 80% slowdown in terms of growth rate.
A look at tax receipts bears this out. In China, individuals with an annual income of 100,000 yuan or more are required to pay taxes. Personal income tax revenue fell by 16% in the first 2 months of last year. This could mean that either more have fallen out of this income bracket, or some in the bracket are earning less than they used to.
Weaker economic growth definitely has an impact on the job market, and especially in the disposable income growth of residents. So with decelerating economic growth, income growth also decelerate.
The South China Morning Post analysed annual reports from 23 of the top Chinese companies across the real estate, internet, automotive and financial industries last year. It found that 14 of them laid off employees in 2023. The technology and real estate sectors were the worst hit. Even the government sector, seen as an iron rice bowl in China, saw a 5% drop in headcount in 2023. Meanwhile, the gig economy is saturated with some 200 million workers. Apart from internal factors, geopolitical shifts have also trickled down to the ordinary Chinese.
Right now, the uncertainty is also rising in terms of different restriction in trade, investment, which has obviously affected some of the provinces or companies that are more externally facing. And in terms of sectors, definitely manufacturing is the one that are being hit the most and almost enter like a deflation trend. For services, it's relatively doing slightly better.
Wang's father owns a towel factory with over 100 employees. His business has been buffeted by the economic headwinds.
这2年的公司规模相较于前几年来说有所缩小，我爸爸也是进行了一定的裁员，因为产量没有以前的需求那么大了。今年情况也不是很乐观。
Last September, Beijing announced a stimulus package worth 1 trillion yuan to boost flagging economic growth. Measures were aimed at key sectors such as real estate and financial services. The housing market support package included lowering mortgage rates by 0.5%, while minimum down payment for all homes was reduced to 15%.
We do see quite a quick rebound in the home transaction. In the tier 1 cities, there's some stabilization in home prices, but it will take a much longer time for it to actually convert into the better investment, which may not happen this year because developers are still busy basically selling or finishing their inventory. They need to deliver their home before they can actually invest further.
The impact of that is mainly to boost investment rather than consumption. And to the extent that mortgage interest rates have fallen, to try to support property investments, property purchases. So it doesn't really directly or so immediately affects consumption spending.
Another focus was monetary easing. The central bank reduced the main policy interest rate by 0.2 percentage points, lowering borrowing costs.
So again, that is directed at improving the finances of government, particularly local governments. It's not really directed at helping consumers or to supporting their spending. If China wanted to boost consumption spending, a more direct way of doing it would be to provide things like what Hong Kong did during COVID, which is consumption vouchers. China hasn't really resorted to those sort of measures. rightly or wrongly, the impact of that is that consumer sentiment in China is still relatively muted and consumption growth is still quite weak.
To get people spending, a trade-in initiative was introduced in July last year. This lets consumers buy new household goods with subsidies if they trade in their old ones. 150 billion yuan was allocated for this scheme.
There's a pot to subsidize the trading in for home appliances, cars, and furniture, because these are the items hit hardest by the housing downturn. When you're not buying a home, you're not buying furniture and a refrigerator. So when you trade in your old refrigerator for a new, government subsidizes 20% of the tag price.
Within the first 5 months, more than 8 million consumers made purchases. 11.8 million appliances were sold, churning 55.8 million yuan in sales. This January, the scheme was expanded, increasing the categories of appliances eligible for subsidies. Over the first 8 days of this year's Spring Festival, total sales exceeded 31 billion yuan.
However, such trading subsidies only helped the products or the sector that are covered. At the same time, it may crowd out consumption spending on other products. So when you buy a new refrigerator this month because of some price discount, you probably postpone your purchase of your mobile phone. So I think at the end of the day, what is needed is still more broad-based measures. You need more investment, create more jobs, stimulate more salary, wage, and overall income growth, so you can have more broad-based recovery of income and consumption.
Despite government support, for Wang, the middle-class status feels precarious.
不是太有信心，但还是希望可以留在这个阶级吧。因为就目前来看，其实还是起色比较小，还是我们家的厂的收益还是维持在一个比较低的水平，所以不是特别有信心。我自己还是想保持在这个位置的，因为我的父亲就是靠自己的努力，我更应该努力去维持住这个水平。
What will happen to China's economy if its middle class is less willing to spend? And what impact will this have on the rest of the world? This traditional Chinese music school opened more than 10 years ago in the heart of Guangzhou City.
大部分的学生都是来自于中产阶层，然后呢，我们的学生有成人也有小孩。班课的话，我们一周的话大概就是有5、6个班左右，然后我们每个班大概人数有5到8个人。
Last year, Yuhua Population Research Institute reported that China is the second most costly country to raise a child after South Korea. Sending their children to enrichment classes is a marker for the middle-class lifestyle.
每堂课的价格呢是大概180到600不等，我们是根据老师的一个教龄啊，还有就是毕业的院校来决定这些课程的价格的。
Since the economic slowdown, there have been reports that clubs and centres offering after-school activities were shutting down.
比如说平时会比较一周可能2次课，那他现在可能这一周他就1次课的这样一个频率，所以对于我们的收入可能是还是有稍微有一点小小的影响的。我觉得这个原因可能就是也会根据就是家庭收入的一个减少，家长会认为那我可以循序渐进的来学习，不一定说我一定要是非常迅速的去把这个课程给学完。
While their course prices haven't changed since the pandemic, the school has made some adjustments to keep its students.
比如说像古筝，我们是会送一些古筝指甲呀，或者说它的配件的节拍器啊、调音器啊，这些就会通过这些来促销。
喺我嘅角度嚟講嘅話咧，我哋屋企咧係好支持一啲中國嘅非遺嘅嘢嘅，例如而家學緊嘅呢個樂器都係中國嘅非遺嘅一種嚟噶嘛。咁我哋當然啦，而家經濟不景，我哋唔會讓佢選擇又學古箏啊、琵琶或者再學一啲中國國畫太多種類，我哋會精挑細選。
Most people have an impression that China's consumption is pretty poor. The truth is that yes, China's consumption growth right now is much slower than the pre-COVID level, but however, there's still much faster consumption growth than most other countries can wish for. Over the past 5 years, the household consumption in Europe didn't grow at all, nothing. The household consumption in the United States increased by about 18% in 5 years. China's house consumption increased by 30% in 5 years, still faster than others.
Be that as it may, huge investments in the manufacturing sector have led to a build-up in capacity over the years. As domestic demand slows, the world's second-largest economy is now facing its longest deflation streak since the 1960s.
And China still is investing a lot. It is still investing more than 40% of its GDP, which is very high by global standards. Most countries invest only about a quarter, at most a third of their output. And what that does is there's a lot of supply. But when consumers are holding back, what that does is it contributes to deflation, falling prices. And when there are falling prices, that also causes consumers to hold back on their spending. They think the prices are continuing to fall. I shouldn't be so eager to spend now. And so deflation becomes a self-fulfilling, self-reinforcing dynamic.
China is actually still a developing economy with a growth rate of around 5%. Having a 1% inflation just simply do not make too much sense. It basically shows that demand is still quite weak.
At China's annual parliamentary gathering, or 2 sessions earlier this month, Beijing stipulated an inflation target of 2%. This is down from last year's 3%, also the lowest since the early 2000s. The government plans to achieve this by injecting more stimulus to boost demand. And here is where the changing spending habits of China's middle class has ripples outside its borders. Chinese suppliers are looking to other markets to absorb their products.
โอ้โหนี่ได้ยินเสียงเพลงไหมคะไม่ได้ยินเลยใช่ไหมคะไม่มีเสียงเพลงไม่มีอะไรเลยคือเงียบจนแบบบางทีได้ยินเสียงแอร์ชัดเจนมากเลย
Bo Bay Shopping Mall is a retail and wholesale market in Bangkok, Thailand, with 7 stories of shops. Or at least it used to.
คือตอนนี้มีแค่2ชั้นที่ว่าปริมาณร้านยังอยู่เยอะแต่ถ้าขึ้นจากชั้น2ไปนี่จะแทบจะค่อยๆลดจำนวนลงคือมันค่อยๆซึมลงเรื่อยๆทยอยร้านทยอยปิดร้านบนนี้ทยอยปิดแล้วก็โรงงานที่ขายผ้าก็เริ่มหายไปทีละเจ้าแล้วก็โรงตัดเย็บก็ขอถอนตัวไปทีละหนึ่งอย่างเงี้ยมันค่อยๆซึมไปเรื่อยๆค่ะเริ่มเมื่อไหร่น่าจะกลางปีที่แล้วที่ปิดเยอะส่วนหนึ่งด้วยแหละสินค้าจีนเข้ามาเยอะโดยเฉพาะสินค้าเด็กนะพี่คิดว่าอีกหน่อยสินค้าเด็กที่นี่ไม่รอดแล้วถูกกว่ามากแค่ไหนอย่างชุดนอนพี่รู้แต่ชุดนอนเนาะชุดนอนพี่ต้นทุนขั้นต่ำเลยนะต่ำสุดนะที่ส่งอยู่หน้าร้านนะ75 บาทเขาขายก็ที่อย่างที่บอกเอาไปเลย2 ชุด100มันต้องต่ำกว่าไหม
In 2024, China's exports hit record highs. Exports from China to Thailand surged 14%. Conversely, exports from Thailand to China declined 5%. Thailand shuttered 2,000 factories in 2023, leading to a loss of thousands of jobs in the manufacturing sector.
ที่โรงงานเนี่ยตีว่า capacity 100% เราเปิดแค่50อีก50 black out ปิดไฟเพราะว่าไม่มีงานให้ลงของไทยเนี่ย1ราคาจะสูงกว่าประมาณ 30-50% วัตถุดิบจะแน่นจะหนักน้ำหนักผ้านี่พูดถึงผ้าน้ำหนักผ้าก็จะดีกว่าแพคเกจจิ้งก็จะดูดีกว่านะครับราคาสูงกว่านี่ชัดเจนของผมเนี่ยอย่าไปสู้เรื่องราคานะครับเขามาเอาง่ายๆถุงเท้าสีดำใส่ทำงานเข้ามาโหลหนึ่ง90 บาท 85-90 อยู่ที่ว่าซื้อมากซื้อน้อยเราขายอยู่ซื้อมากซื้อน้อยของเราก็อยู่ที่ประมาณ 130-150 ราคาต่างกันตั้งโหลหนึ่ง40 บาทแต่คุณภาพต่างกันมากเราต้องเอาคุณภาพเข้าสู้และสร้างแบรนด์แน่นอนเมื่อกำไรลดลงเราก็ต้องลดค่าใช้จ่ายตอนที่พีคสุดๆผมเคยมีพนักงานหน้าร้านพนักงานขาย12 ถึง 14 คนตอนพีคสุดๆปี 2008 แต่ปัจจุบันผมมีพนักงานแค่4 คนที่เห็น4 คนก็พอแล้ว
Last July, Thailand imposed a 7% value-added tax on imports less than 1,500 baht in value. This was aimed primarily at Chinese goods.
มันคงไม่ได้เสียเต็มอย่างที่เห็นหรอกค่ะมันปล่อยเข้ามาเยอะมากจนมันเกิดเหตุการณ์อย่างนี้แล้วมันแก้ที่ระบบไม่ได้แล้วทุกคนต้องแก้ที่ตัวเอง
เอาแน่นอนครับคือผมก็ไม่แน่ใจนะว่ารัฐบาลจะทำได้มากน้อยแค่ไหนเพราะว่าเท่าที่ดูข่าวถ้าเราไปพุชเขาก็พุชแบ็ก
Other countries in the region are also taking a tougher stance on cheap Chinese imports. Last July, Indonesia proposed tariffs of between 100 to 200% on a range of Chinese products. These include footwear, clothing, textiles, and ceramics. Vietnam has also banned Chinese online retailers Shein and Temu for missing a government deadline to register their companies. This comes after accusations of pricing out local producers and selling counterfeit items.
If you are saying that Southeast Asia countries are importing too much from China, that becomes a problem. They have said it's a problem for whom? If they're buying a lot from China, that means consumers want it. Not only consumers want it, in fact, the businesses want it, because China's export these days are not just cheap consumer products. Over half of China's export these days are machineries, equipment, and IT products. They are capital goods, not consumer goods. These are the product business need to put on the factory floor, put into the offices. So it's not just consumer goods.
In the short run, maybe it's good for the world. But structurally speaking, in the long run, domestic firms, especially the SMEs, will find it quite difficult to compete with all this production coming from China, with this more well-built e-commerce platforms that will have an impact on jobs. So I think in the long run, it basically means that the world may not be as open as before.
China's deflation is expected to persist for the rest of the year. But even if Chinese consumers don't spend as much as they used to, what about the size of China's middle class? Can they continue to grow?
In 来北京想去雍和宫，因为都是说雍和宫非常的灵嘛，就你要求什么，它其实都变相的会让你实现自己愿望。
There is one thing that 22-year-old Shu Haonan prays for: to pass the bar exam after failing it previously on his first attempt.
我现在的现状是一边工作，然后一边备考，准备再考一次这个律师执业资格证。我现在兼职的工作是教培销售。
Shu's hometown is in Shenyang, northeast of Beijing, where his family runs a clothing store. They once belonged to the middle class, but have since fallen on hard times.
前几年的疫情，它其实对于实体业打击还是蛮大的。那我们家里可能因为这些情况，很多那个企业就他们拖欠薪资等等，资金链可能跟不上了，再加上需求也没有那么高。疫情恢复的时候，大家都开始把价格压得很低，去争夺市场的时候，我们家就没有太能做得下去，然后就有点走向一些衰败。
Shu graduated in 2024 with a degree in law. By passing the bar, he's hoping to earn a substantial income to reverse his family's fortunes. The average salary for a lawyer in China ranges from 300,000 to 600,000 yuan.
如果是对于我能不能当律师的前景是乐观的。
President Xi Jinping wants to grow China's middle-income group to half the size of its population by 2035. This means raising the incomes of some 200 million people. For China, education is often seen as a ticket to climb the social ladder.
那你们那宿舍就是住几个人啊？
一个宿舍住8个人，上下铺就会住着比较挤。
Liu Guojiang comes from a third-tier city in Henan, a province south of Beijing. He's come to the capital to see how his son has settled into university. Back home, Liu is a maintenance worker at a factory with a monthly salary of 5,000 yuan. He's considered lower income in China.
多注意点身体，是第一次北京，也是第一次出最远的门。我来北京是来看我儿子，他在林业大学读大3，然后平时见面很少，然后工厂放假，我趁着机会过来看看他。
对，就是那种。
因为作为一个父亲，儿子能在北京一线城市，而且是一个比名牌一个学校，我感到非常的骄傲。
但是现在也看了一些东西，我就觉得还是应该。
It's not common for young people from Liu's hometown to move to bigger cities to study.
学费5000，再加上我们平时给他的1500，大概一年在2万多左右吧，占我的收入的一大部分，我觉得挺贵的，肯定要精打细算了。因为我们给我老婆也是平时很少买衣服，然后经常也家里的旧电器也基本上都是旧的，也没有更换过。还有一个我们平时用的手机都是旧的手机。
爸爸，这就是我宿舍了。
行。因为我们家孩子他是计算机行业，然后这个方面现在就是发展的还快，然后工资也高，我希望他以后能改善我们家庭的条件。
China's youth unemployment hit an all-time high of 21% in June 2023 before the government stopped publishing regular data. Graduates made up a large portion of this figure. The rate fell to 18% last August after the criteria was tweaked to exclude current students. A degree is no longer a guarantee of a middle-class lifestyle.
For decades, the Chinese dream was very clear: study hard, work hard, and you will get ahead. So that promise was a very powerful motivator, and now that promise is starting to feel less certain.
很多人可能他也一直努力工作了10几年，但其实他的生活质量或者生活水平也只是保持在一个 维度上面，它没有质的飞跃。而想要达到这种质的飞跃、阶级的跨越的话，我觉得除了努力，更多的还需要机遇。
When we talk about the middle class, it's not just income, it's also education levels, right? So if younger people or college graduates find it difficult to find a job, one effect is that it slows down the growth of the middle class. Another effect, which we are already seeing, it causes workers to be demotivated or demoralized at a very early stage in their working life. So in China, the word 躺平, which means to lie flat, essentially to do the bare minimum. So that phenomenon has been gaining traction, I would say, for the last 3 to 4 years. And that's very worrying.
These sentiments are a hurdle to President Xi's common prosperity push. Common prosperity is rooted in communism and was revived by Xi in 2021. The intent is to reduce inequality and ensure affluence and prosperity for all.
The goal is to create an olive-shaped society with a large middle class and few people at the very top or at the bottom of the income scale. The idea is that this type of social structure is good for both economic growth and social stability. Unfortunately, this common prosperity agenda got off to a bumpy start. The pandemic, the tensions with the United States, and China's own recent policy decisions have created many challenges.
The common prosperity drive in the past few years achieved one thing, that is helped lift the lowest run, the people in the edge of poverty, out of the poverty trap. The two other areas still less than desired. The first is how to prevent lower income people falling back in poverty after a few years. Second is somehow it overlooked people in the middle class. So we need to lift the whole boat, help the people from the whole income spectrum up.
I think China needs a new social compact. It should absorb some of the risk associated with old age retirement, absorb more of the risk associated with illness and health. Presidency said a couple of years ago that we should avoid the welfare trap, right, where people become lazy or become reliant on government handouts. I think it is entirely possible to have a consumption-led economy without it being welfarism, right? Without it being sustained or maintained by handouts to the population.
At the two sessions, China announced its aim to create 12 million new urban jobs this year. Yet, the country faces mounting external threats. President Donald Trump imposed additional 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports into the United States this February and doubled the amount early this month. China retaliated with 10 to 15% levies on products such as American coal and gas, as well as agricultural and food products. A trade war could weaken Chinese middle-class confidence.
So the biggest losers of Trump's tariffs would be American consumers. There is no doubt about that. It deprives them of the inflation-reducing benefits of Chinese goods going into the United States. In the medium term, it might also hurt China and Chinese workers.
In 2017-2018, 20% of China's export went to the United States. Right now, it's about 15% of China's export go to the United States. So that it means for each percentage point in the tariff rate hike, its impact on China's exports is about 25% less than in 2017-2018. Even back then, we saw China's export held up. So we know there may be storm ahead, but so far people are not in a panic mode.
In 2008, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, China's middle-class-driven domestic consumption was a key to the country's recovery. This in turn helped pull other countries out of recession. These days, though China's middle class is projected to continue growing, they are a changed group, no longer as loose with their purse strings. As trade wars and deglobalization loom, how the Chinese middle class spends could be important for the world's second largest economy and beyond.
I think this 2025 may still be less than desired, but still should be a better year than we saw in the past few years. Stock market has stabilized, and housing market may also stabilize, so that may help stabilize or even lift, especially middle class consumption.
A lot of consumers, they may be reducing the spending on automobile or basically other luxury products. But on the services side, people are more willing to spend on some lifestyle type of activities or healthcare and etc. So it is more like a shift of the consumption pattern that may not be able to fully revert this deceleration trend, but still they're still spending. I mean, there's 1.4 billion population there.
最近几年的经济并没有什么太大的起色吧，但是其实我还是对未来的经濟發展抱有一定的信心。我認為前途無量。
所以我會覺得我哋嘅國家會越嚟越好，因為佢喺國際上嚟講，佢已經係比較強大嘅我哋國家。